Edward, a boy of mere 14, ascended the throne of England at a time when the realm was a fragile tapestry of political intrigue, religious tension, and dynastic ambition. His youth was not merely an age, it was a vulnerability, one that would shape the tragic course of his life and the nation he was destined to rule. Born into a royal lineage burdened with expectation, Edward's early life was dominated by the looming presence of adults who wielded power and influence, yet often undercut his own authority. The world into which he stepped as king was a court alive with whispers, plotting, and the subtle manipulations of those who sought to bend the young monarch to their will. From the moment Edward assumed the crown, his life became a performance on a stage he was barely prepared to navigate. The crown itself was a symbol heavier than any physical weight, representing centuries of dynastic struggles and the demands of a kingdom in transition. His advisors, well-intentioned or otherwise, exerted their influence with varying degrees of subtlety and ruthlessness. Each council carried the weight of ambition, often clashing with Edward's own inclinations, and the boy found himself entangled in a web of conflicting loyalties and expectations. In such a fragile environment, innocence was a liability, and the lines between friendship and manipulation blurred into obscurity. Edward's personality, marked by sensitivity and a desire to please, became both his charm and his curse. He had a natural inclination toward piety and moral reflection, traits that earned him the admiration of some and the frustration of those who demanded a more calculated approach to governance. Yet, his youth, coupled with these very virtues, made him susceptible to coercion, particularly from those whose personal ambitions took precedence over the welfare of the realm. The court, as ever, thrived on ambition, and in such an arena, Edward's ethical compass, however noble, often collided tragically with the cold pragmatism of power politics. The king's health, fragile from birth, added another layer to his vulnerability. In an era when medical knowledge was rudimentary and the threats of illness loomed large, Edward's body could not always sustain the relentless pressures of kingship. Historical accounts suggest that he experienced episodes of fever and physical weakness that, while perhaps common among nobles of the period, carried disproportionate risks for someone who bore the weight of a nation on their shoulders. Each bout of illness created ripples of anxiety and speculation, both within the court and across the kingdom, further destabilizing the already precarious situation surrounding the young sovereign. Religious conflict also defined Edward's reign. England, caught between emerging Protestant reforms and traditional Catholic orthodoxy, was a kingdom in the throes of spiritual transformation. Edward, though a child, became the focal point of these competing ideologies, expected to champion one faction while navigating the treacherous waters of theological debate. His personal leanings leaned toward reformist ideas, influenced by his education and the Council of Advisors committed to Protestantism. Yet the pressure to appease conservative elements within the nobility was relentless, creating a tension that weighed heavily upon his conscience. The king's religious choices, though guided by principle, were not free from political consequence, illustrating how even moral decisions were weaponized in the pursuit of power. Amidst these overwhelming pressures, Edward exhibited flashes of remarkable insight and resolve. Letters and documents from his brief reign reveal moments when he engaged with matters of state with intelligence and compassion, demonstrating that beneath his youth and frailty lay a monarch capable of understanding the profound responsibilities of kingship. He displayed a keen interest in the administration of justice and the welfare of his subjects, striving to embody the ideals of a righteous and benevolent ruler. Yet, every act of virtue was shadowed by the relentless machinery of politics, the scheming of those around him, and the ever-present specter of illness. Tragically, Edward's life was a study in the fragility of potential. His untimely death, shrouded in a mix of natural causes and possibly exacerbated by the relentless pressures of rulership, brought an abrupt end to a young life poised between promise and tragedy. Historians have debated the precise causes and circumstances, but the consensus acknowledges the convergence of physical vulnerability, political tension, and youthful inexperience as defining elements in his fate. Edward's demise did not merely mark the loss of a young king. It served as a stark reminder of the human cost embedded in the exercise of power and the fragile intersection of youth, ambition, and destiny. The final months of Edward's life were marked by both physical decline and intensifying political turbulence. His fragile body, already weakened by the demands of kingship and recurrent illness, struggled under the pressure of constant decision-making, ceremonial obligations, and the unrelenting scrutiny of courtiers and foreign emissaries. Every day became a trial, as Edward navigated a world in which appearances mattered as much as substance, and where a misstep could endanger not only his authority, but his very life. The boy king's advisors, while ostensibly committed to the crown, often acted in ways that revealed self-interest more than loyalty, further compounding his vulnerability. Edward's health issues were exacerbated by the era's rudimentary medical practices. Treatments based on humors and superstition often caused more harm than relief, and the lack of effective care left him at the mercy of both disease and exhaustion. Fever, recurring infections, and the physical strain of ceremonial duties sapped his strength, leaving him pale and weakened. Historical accounts describe him as appearing almost spectral, a sovereign whose body was ill-suited to bear the weight of kingship. Each day, the young king confronted the stark reality that his own physical limitations could define the fate of the kingdom. The political landscape around Edward was equally unforgiving. Powerful nobles, each with their own ambitions, maneuvered relentlessly to assert influence over the boy king and the direction of the kingdom. Factions emerged, often disguised behind masks of loyalty and piety, each seeking to control the young monarch for their advantage. Edward's personal convictions, particularly his desire to implement religious reforms, placed him at the center of a dangerous struggle between entrenched conservative forces and reform-minded advisors. The tension was relentless, and Edward, though intellectually capable, was emotionally vulnerable to the pressures that surrounded him. He was a young ruler trying to govern a nation whose complexities far outstripped his years. Despite these overwhelming challenges, Edward showed extraordinary moments of courage and resolve. He persisted in pursuing his vision for a more just and moral kingdom, taking steps to reform religious practices and promote ethical governance. Letters, proclamations, and administrative records reveal a monarch deeply concerned with fairness, the welfare of his subjects, and the establishment of enduring principles. Yet, his ideals often collided with the harsh realities of political pragmatism, leaving him isolated and at times desperate. The contrast between his noble intentions and the unyielding forces around him underscored the tragic dimension of his reign, the tension between youthful idealism and the brutal demands of power. Edward's illness intensified in the months leading to his death. Historical accounts suggest that he suffered from a condition that caused high fevers and severe weakness, leaving him increasingly incapacitated. The combination of his physical fragility, relentless pressure, and emotional strain created a perfect storm that hastened the end of his life. In a court accustomed to the resilience of adult monarchs, Edward's vulnerability was painfully visible. Courtiers and subjects alike watched with a mix of anxiety and awe as the boy king struggled to maintain composure while his body betrayed him. Each day became a testament to both his courage and the cruel inevitability of his fate. As Edward's final days approached, the weight of the crown seemed almost unbearable. The boy, who had ascended the throne with youthful hope and ambition, faced a life in which every choice carried consequence and every weakness was exploited. Friends and enemies alike watched the slow unraveling of a life that had held immense promise. His death, when it came, was sudden to some but perhaps inevitable to those who understood the relentless pressures that had defined his reign. The kingdom mourned not just the loss of a monarch, but the extinguishing of potential, a young life cut short before it could fully flourish. The aftermath of Edward's passing reverberated across England and beyond. His death brought an immediate shift in the line of succession, with political factions scrambling to assert influence over the new monarch. The young king's legacy, though brief, became a symbol of the vulnerability of youth in power and the tragic consequences of placing a child at the center of a turbulent political landscape. Edward's story endured in historical memory as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the fragility of human life, the perils of courtly intrigue, and the harsh realities that accompany absolute authority, especially when vested in someone not yet equipped to wield it fully. Edward's life and death remain a poignant chapter in English history. They illustrate the delicate balance between ambition and innocence, power and vulnerability. His short reign, marked by moral integrity, intellectual curiosity, and physical fragility, highlights the often unforgiving nature of monarchy, where personal virtues are tested against the harsh imperatives of politics. In remembering Edward, history preserves not only the story of a boy king, but also the enduring lesson of the human cost embedded in the pursuit of power, and the tragic beauty of a life filled with promise yet shadowed by inevitability. Edward's death marked not only the end of a brief and fragile reign, but also a turning point in the history of England. The young king, whose life had been dominated by illness, political tension, and personal virtue, left a kingdom in delicate balance. The transition of power was immediate and tense, as Edward's passing triggered the complex machinery of succession, a system in which alliances, ambition, and influence could rapidly reshape the political landscape. His demise brought relief to some factions and despair to others, highlighting the way his life had been inseparable from the broader currents of English governance and dynastic struggle. The new monarch, ascending after Edward, faced a realm already scarred by the boy king's brief reign. Edward's reforms, particularly in matters of religion, left behind both hope and resentment. Reform-minded advisors mourned the young king not only for the loss of a friend or patron, but also for the potential of a more enlightened rule that now would remain unrealized. Conservative elements, however, saw opportunity in the sudden vacancy, maneuvering to restore traditional practices or consolidate their own influence. Edward's death, therefore, was not merely a personal tragedy, but a catalyst for renewed political tension, demonstrating the fragility of progress when vested in the hands of a single youthful monarch. Historians often reflect on Edward's life with a mixture of admiration and sorrow. His short reign, though limited by circumstances, offers glimpses of a ruler who understood the moral responsibilities of kingship. He exhibited compassion, intellectual curiosity, and a desire to enact reforms that would benefit his subjects, all remarkable qualities for someone so young. Yet, the constraints of age, health, and political environment prevented these qualities from fully manifesting. In studying Edward, scholars find a compelling example of potential thwarted by circumstance and of how the burdens of authority can weigh disproportionately upon the inexperienced and the fragile. Edward's story also resonates beyond the immediate context of English history. It serves as a broader meditation on the human experience of responsibility, vulnerability, and the consequences of expectation. A boy thrust into immense power, he faced pressures that would have tested even a seasoned ruler. His efforts to act justly and wisely in the face of overwhelming challenges reflect a universal struggle, the conflict between personal integrity and the demands of those who wield authority around us. In this sense, Edward's life is both historically specific and timeless, a poignant reminder of the costs of leadership and the vulnerabilities of youth. Cultural memory has preserved Edward's legacy with a mixture of reverence and pathos. Artistic representations, historical narratives, and popular accounts often emphasize his youth, his frailty, and the tragedy of a life ended prematurely. In literature and painting, he appears as an emblem of lost potential, the boy king, whose moral seriousness and delicate constitution made his reign both noble and tragically doomed. These portrayals reinforce the enduring fascination with Edward as a figure who, in a few short years, encapsulated the tensions of power, the fragility of life, and the inexorable sweep of historical forces beyond any individual's control. The impact of Edward's death on the monarchy itself was profound. Succession crises, shifts in religious policy, and the reassertion of aristocratic influence were direct consequences of his premature passing. England's political and religious landscape would continue to evolve, but Edward's brief rule left an indelible mark. It was a period that exposed the vulnerabilities inherent in a system dependent on the lives of individuals, particularly children, and highlighted the moral and emotional challenges of governance at the highest level. His story became a touchstone for discussions of monarchy, youth, and the human dimensions of power, influencing both contemporaneous and later interpretations of royal responsibility. Ultimately, Edward's life and death are remembered not only for their historical significance, but also for their profound human resonance. They remind us of the fragility of life, the weight of expectation, and the often tragic intersection of personal virtue and systemic forces. In the brief span of his 14 years as king, Edward demonstrated courage, intelligence, and ethical commitment, even as the circumstances of his life conspired against him. His story endures as a testament to the complexities of human potential, the inexorable pressures of political life, and the poignancy of a young ruler whose promise was never fully realized.